Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tecovas boots. I finally have a pair, and they are handmade, high quality, stylish, comfortable, and I even got them customized with leather stamping. So go get yours at the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, Tecovas is opening a brand new store for your Western wear needs on Main Street in Georgetown. Swing by for their grand opening party September 27th through 29th for live music and freebies for the first 50 of y'all to get there. So come shop with me at Tecovas. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Austin, all of a sudden, there are a few really big things happening here when it comes to transportation. And it is going to take a few years and get very messy. So we're talking to Kelsey Thompson, a transportation reporter with KXAN, about the changes underway for Austin's planes, trains, and automobiles. CityCast Austin is brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tecovas. It's Thursday, September 19th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello. I'm here today talking to Kelsey Thompson, a reporter for KXAN, and we are going to talk about transportation. What's up, Kelsey? How are you?
Hey, Nikki. I'm good. How are you doing today?
I am great. I'm great. Thank you for chatting transportation with me. So things are about to get crazy as far as transportation goes in Austin. Billions of dollars in construction simultaneously taking place all over the city. But this hasn't always been the case. Now, you came to Austin from New York in 2019. So what is your headline takeaway about Austin's transportation? Like, how do you describe the situation here now?
You know, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed, but I've also heard from people who have lived here most of their lives, Austin really had this, if we don't build it, they won't come mentality for so long.
Oh my God, that's so true. Yeah. That's perfect.
Yeah, that all of a sudden it was like, if we don't expand, we're not going to entice and attract more people. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, we have so many people.
And we have all these people.
Yes. And our infrastructure just cannot handle this boom in population. And so I feel like in the 5+ years I've been here, it's been a lot of retroactive work to try and catch Austin up to speed. But then also, how do we get even ahead of the curve? Because we know that growth is going to continue coming. So I feel like it's been, even just within the past 5 years, the development of projects that are coming down the pipeline and the work that the city is trying to do is really ambitious, but you can still see the remnants of that old mentality and how they're having to chip away at this idea of like, we have so many people and we are not the same size community we were 20 years ago.
I mean, my friends are tired of hearing me tell this story, but literally one of the first things that I ever voted on was a metro rail, like the kind of this, maybe the second iteration of what a metro rail. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. Yep. Yeah, we totally need a metro rail. And people were like, nah, we don't need that. We're a small city. We're a small, quaint town. We do not need a metro rail. And now here we are.
Yes. And it's really interesting. I was at an event last week with a bunch of city officials and transit leaders. And Mayor Watson, who was mayor in 2000 when the first attempt at light rail was brought to voters and it failed by a very small percentage, he was like, can you imagine if 20+ years ago this got approved, the cost of implementing and constructing that and what Austin as a city could look like?
It's ridiculous. So let's talk about Project Connect. So Project Connect is a $7.1 billion transportation plan, and it was approved by voters in 2020. And then there was this lawsuit filed over whether or not the funding mechanism complies with state law. So do we know where this light rail project is now?
So right now, this is the $1 million question. Right now, Project Connect officials said they are still moving ahead with that engineering design work for the light rail. They have told me time and time again that they are, standing by the funding mechanism that voters approved with that property tax rate allocation. The big question is going to be what the court system decides. So back in June, we were supposed to have this, trial officially start on this lawsuit centered around Project Connect's funding. That quickly got started and stopped and got kicked to the Third Court of Appeals. It's now at the 15th Court of Appeals. So yes, it's just,
oh my God,
it's kicking the can down the road and then some. So we don't even know the timeline of when that suit itself is going to get settled because, there's a whole legal process that has to go through. But Austin Transit Partnership, which is overseeing the design and construction of Project Connect, said, we're still moving ahead. We're still working on engineering and design efforts. I know later this fall, they're supposed to have their draft environmental impact statement document. That's essentially this big old federal document for projects that are looking to get federal dollars to be like, here are all the impacts this project will have on the environment, on neighborhoods nearby,
right.
The whole impact list, essentially. And then we're supposed to get some closer design looks at things like station designs and some finalized views, hopefully in 2025, because they're eyeing a 2027 construction start date, as long as the timeline works. Yeah. So it's sooner than I think a lot of us realize.
It really is sooner.
Yeah.
And also I'm petty. So I love the fact that they're like, yeah, y'all do all that little court stuff. We're going to keep designing. We're going to keep moving forward. We'll let y'all work that out.
Just so unbothered. They're just so nonchalant. They're like, yeah,
so unbothered. Yeah. I'm like, yes, I love it. I love it. Do we know how many miles of rail are planned?
So with this first phase of light rail they're designing right now, it's 9.8 miles. So they're starting up at 38th Street, and then it's going to go down to Old Torp Street, and then head out east to Yellow Jacket Lane.
And is the first phase taking all of that 7.1 billion, or is the first phase a piece of that 7.1 billion?
It's a piece. It's the largest chunk by and large of the Project Connect program budget. But that budget also covers things like the new Metro Rapid bus lines that are coming online next year, new pickup zones. There's other amenities as part of the Project Connect program that are part of that. Officials have said they're looking at more of like a kind of $4 to $5 billion budget for this initial phase of light rail. Who knows with inflation impacts and construction, but that's more or less the budget frame they're looking at for the light rail investment.
And I imagine that the longer it takes to get it going, the more expensive it's going to be, and the more they're going to have to adjust that number.
Because, it would be night and day difference. And even just in the last 5 years, the impact of COVID on wages, on construction costs, on just inflation, on right-of-way, as Austin has gotten to be a more attractive city for real estate prices. It's crazy to think about what has changed just in the last 5 years. And so there is also this pressure of like, they're really chasing that 2027 construction start because they want to get these contracts signed, dot those I's, cross those T's.
Exactly.
And get things moving.
So, currently we have a red line commuter rail, which, depending on who you talk to, is useful or useless. Is it going to be like the same kind of basic train that we have now, just a different route?
So it's going to be interesting because it's running primarily at street level, including through downtown. So there had been this whole concept in discussion shortly after it was approved by voters of potential of going underground, doing these sort of like raised bridges to have it, above traffic level. Ultimately, it was a combination of cost factors, but also logistics of how do we get it through downtown, that they're going to essentially try and retrofit downtown to have it running through these streets. And that's going to be really interesting. And I think that's where we're going to probably have to really, I hate this expression, but pack our patience as construction on that is undergoing, because that's really going to change just the entire landscape of downtown.
It's going to change everything.
Yeah. And on top of just the fact that most of us who have driven through downtown lately, there's already a ton of construction and street work happening.
And I'm trying to figure out where it's going to fit. This first iteration, they are not anticipating that there's going to be an airport connection yet.
No,
right?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's like if we get a lot of extra funding from the federal government, which they're already eyeing potentially up to a 50% match from the federal government to support construction, which would be, if they're able to secure that, a game changer for this project. If within that funding, they're able to find, the extra pool of money to go toward the airport, they said that is one of those priority extensions, but they don't want to make that promise because we all know how expensive construction can quickly get. And so they don't want to overpromise, underdeliver. I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings about getting into the airport. That's been probably the overarching sentiment since they announced this first phase. Like, when are we getting to the airport?
So are we prioritizing adding paid parking lots at the airport over any kind of mass transportation?
My understanding is the reason they haven't prioritized extending it to the airport is because they want to make sure that the people who live full-time in Austin get maximum benefit, and to focus on areas where there's already either existing ridership through, Cap Metro's bus system or the rail system, or just to reach people where maybe there are more transit deserts and there's not as much access to personal vehicles or robust transit. The question that always comes up is, there's a lot of people who live in Austin or neighboring Austin who work at the airport, who are commuting to and from. There's lots of residents who want that as a either work benefit or, a leisure benefit for when they're traveling for trips. It's going to be interesting to see if they're able to pull that off in this first phase. But Project Connect officials have said that as part of this Journey with AUS airport expansion effort, airport officials have already said, we have saved the right of way, so when that future extension is available, we'll be able to work it into our system. We want the light rail to come. It's just a matter of, is it going to be this first phase, or is that going to be top priority for future build outs?
It's hard to kind of get excited about something that's so far away, but let's talk about the airport.
Yeah.
So it seems like we have outgrown the Austin Bergstrom International Airport. We outgrew it a long time ago, actually.
Yeah.
There are only 34 gates, and the airport serves more than 22 million passengers every year. We are only equipped to handle 15 million passengers a year. So what is ABIA's future? What's ahead?
Yeah, so this has been a really ambitious plan on ABIA's part. Journey with AUS is the official program name. And that's essentially, officials are saying they're basically trying to rebuild a brand new airport on top of the existing one while keeping operations going. So we're looking at a combination of both near-term projects that we're already seeing happen at the airport, but then also long-term new concourses and really expanding out the infrastructure and total size of it. But right now, we're looking at things like upgrading AUS's baggage handling system, its TSA checkpoints, the Westgate expansion, I know, is a big one that they've been coming down the pipeline. But anyone who has traveled through AUS recently has felt that sort of growing pain of how do we operate as a city, as the capital city of Texas, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, when our infrastructure just isn't up to par. And so it's a multi-billion-dollar effort to overhaul the airport. And it's going to be close to a decade, they're saying, to really complete all of that work, which is so hard to fathom because we also have so many other projects that are going to take a decade to get done. So I feel like, unfortunately, not to be the bearer of bad news, but unfortunately, as a transportation reporter, that's usually my job. There's going to be a lot of construction happening, and we're just all going to have to find our patience and work through it in the next several years.
Austin 10 years from now is going to be very grateful for all of the patience that we're about to have.
Yeah.
So Concourse B at the airport seems like it's been this weird experiment. So what's happening with that?
Yeah. So basically it's going to be essentially a tunnel system they're trying to build to connect the existing Barbara Jordan terminal with this new Concourse B. And it's just kind of hard to work our mind around because Barbara Jordan, by and large, has been the terminal, save for the South Terminal, operating just a couple of those Allegiant Frontier operations. But that is the kind of the crown jewel of the AUS overhaul, is the introduction of Concourse B in that underground tunnel system, which, most of us who have traveled across the country have experienced traveling that sort of underground tunnel system. So much more efficient. It's a great way to expand size and make it a lot more mobile of an operation, but it's definitely going to take several years to get that underway, and just chipping away at the final work of, designing and engineering that portion of the project.
I can't even fathom how they're going to maintain operations while also digging tunnels under the airport.
Yeah. Throughout this process, they've really flagged that they're trying to do this in segments and, piecemeal phases so that they can help keep it as smooth operating as possible while still, redirecting passengers to different portions of the airport or having to, minimize some resources to accommodate construction. So it is part of that decade-long initiative, but construction is always finicky. You never know if we're going to finish on time, on budget, or what could come up, especially since the pandemic. We've seen a lot of changes in the construction game.
And speaking of budget, earlier you mentioned billions with a B, but have they put out a number we're thinking maybe this much? Or are they avoiding locking down one number?
Looking at the landscape of total Austin infrastructure projects happening, including things like Project Connect and I-35's expansion, the number city transportation officials are giving is $25 billion for all of those projects. And so we know that Project Connect and I-35 already got that B. So
already got the B. So let's talk automobiles. So
yes.
According to Texas Department of Transportation, the number of registered vehicles in Texas surged by 172% over the last 40 years, while highway capacity increased only 19%.
Yeah.
So we know that we can't build our way out of this. We have to get people to share cars or take different kinds of transportation, but also Texas be Texasin. And it's hard to take people's cars and trucks away.
Yeah.
So what do you think? How do you think we are going to find that common ground? What do you think is going to be the thing that helps us kind of meet in the middle?
Well, it is interesting because I feel like you have that juxtaposition already of just the fact we have this I-35 Central expansion is coming down the pipeline. Within the next few months, we're going to start seeing noticeable construction activity on that. But then simultaneously, we're working toward this light rail system. So you're already kind of seeing this tale of two cities almost in transportation in terms of needing to expand that highway infrastructure, but then also this philosophy of we need more mass transit. And now I know with TxDOT's plan for the I-35 Central project, they are adding those high occupancy vehicle lanes. So for things like carpools, buses, things like that, there is prioritization of those forms of non-single use transit in that project. But like you said, Texas as a state has always loved their cars. We love our trucks. And also I-35 as a corridor is a huge commerce corridor for these big rig trucks that are, carrying goods and services along. So it's a very interesting dynamic to see this kind of bridging of state policymaking where they really have to look at how to help from an economic standpoint, get those trucks along while they're addressing congestion issues. But then also at the local level, you see this appetite for, no, we want to try and move people away from single-use vehicles. We want to try and promote mass transit. But it also comes at retrofitting a city that by and large has been a car-centric and car-dependent city for so long.
8 miles of I-35 through downtown Austin are about to be under construction. Nearly 200,000 vehicles drive on the highway every day.
Yep.
What do they have any kind of timeline for construction here?
Yes. So right now we're looking, it's 8 miles, $4.5 billion. And right now they're looking at doing it in about 6 different phases. And the first phase we're going to see activity on within the next few months is going to be on reconstructing the Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge that goes over 35, which is going to be real interesting because that is a huge east-west corridor heading into and out of downtown. Yep,
well,
and
also,
TUT.
What?
Yeah. So right now they're
smack dab in the middle of football season. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh my God, the disrespect. That's ridiculous.
I can't even visualize or even try to articulate it. But basically, again, keeping in mind construction timelines vary, but they're looking at trying to wrap everything up by about 2032. So it's an 8-year-long initiative. And a big part of it is going to be reconstructing the Lady Bird Lake portion with the bridge and just widening that. I think the MLK Bridge and the UT ones are going to be interesting just because, like you said, not only is that a major area for students, but those are huge employers in that area.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, I don't even know how to brace ourselves or anticipate because they will be keeping I-35 open, they've said. They're just going to minimize lanes and adjust things for traffic. But, if there's a wreck on I-35 today and one lane is closed, we already know what that impact is. It's substantial. So it's definitely going to be a very pronounced change in people's commute times. And I anticipate we're probably going to see people trying to change their behavior on 35 of, when they leave work or head from their homes to their commutes, because it's going to be just a lot more concentrated vehicles in a limited amount of lanes as they're working their way along those 6 phases.
I mean, all I'm hearing is that I shouldn't leave my house for 8 years. That's because this is going to be insanity. How is Austin preparing for that giant interruption?
There's things that they've talked about preparing, definitely notifying people in advance of different construction phases starting so people can, prep for it. But I know I was chatting with a transportation official earlier today, and they were just like, we need to try and also work on our messaging to help people change even their mobility habits. If we can encourage more people to carpool, or if we can encourage and entice people to try out the bus system or to try out some sort of non-single-use vehicle, I think the big thing is just going to be to really try and be proactive as these new phases of construction are coming online, between messaging from TxDOT, but then also city officials, to really stress to people as early as possible, this new change is coming. It's going to impact your congestion and commute operations.
And it's funny that you say that too, because there are now also, there's just an apartment complex that's just had their grand opening called the Ivory. It's a no parking facility. So there's nowhere for you to park a car.
I feel like even at the city level, even look at the parking minimum requirements changes City Council approved this year. Mm-hmm. There's this appetite, I think, at the city level to really try and reduce that car dependency on residents, and whether that's through new construction builds like that new apartment complex that doesn't have on-site parking, or trying to work with businesses on minimizing those lot sizes for parking. It's very interesting to see those sort of mechanisms and opportunities the city's trying to pursue on that end of things, knowing that not only are they trying to reduce car dependency because of things like, I-35 and construction, that they're trying to reduce people's reliance on cars, but the city has also been working so hard at an environmental standpoint on their sustainability goals. And so much of that is linked to car use.
So I-35 is not just a highway. It's also been a barrier or a dividing line in Austin history. Back in the 1920s, when it was East Avenue, a physical barrier between East and West Austin, and a racial divide for Austin's Black residents. Let's talk a little bit about what these changes to 35 mean to people who live here.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the probably most nuanced parts of this expansion project, is you have state officials saying that this is so necessary to alleviate congestion and mobility, but then you have there's been many local city and county leadership, but also then many residents, many business owners, born and raised native Austinites, who have said, okay, but what about the history of I-35? And we know that it was a way to segregate Black and Brown communities from the downtown and West Side corridors. And that history, unfortunately, lingers today. We see a lot of data analysis on the socioeconomic status of people who live along the I-35 corridor, much lower levels and income levels, but also health disparities along the corridor between those who live on the west side. I did a project back in May looking into the history of I-35 as part of this expansion, and we went through thousands and thousands of public comments, and a number of them that talked about racism and gentrification and the divide from the 35 corridor was astounding, because these projects, typically you don't get a lot of community engagement on a transportation project. People are kind of like, whatever. This one, I think, hits particularly different because of that history. And city leadership have looked to the cap and stitches as a tool of physically reconnecting East and West Side by having, ease of access across the sunken portions of the highway. And looking to try and incorporate more community feedback and perspective on how to design this, what these will look like, what amenities they will look like. But I do feel like even with those initiatives, we're still hearing from so many people who are like, okay, but I'm being displaced by this project. We are seeing this cyclical nature almost of history repeating itself.
So for those of you, anyone listening that don't know what the cap and stitch thing, it's essentially, and I'm way oversimplifying, There's a portion of I-35 where they're going to go underground. And what that means is, I believe it's the area from just 11th and 12th, or is it a much larger area?
There's several different areas.
Yeah. They're going to create, instead of having the lanes that cross over the highway, it's just going to be a park. It's going to be a green space that is supposed to connect east and west. But the point is, in order to do that, more people have to be displaced from the east side. There are so many businesses that we've already lost.
Yeah. So TxDOT they're leading the helm on the actual roadway construction project while the city is handling the cap and stitch stuff. So the city's working separately on that end of the project. But for TxDOT, they have been, in contact with the property owners of these different parcels for well over a year now, since they finalized the plans for the expansion project. And that is going to entail basically going back and forth between that property owner, TxDOT, and an independent assessor to see how much is your property worth. We want to buy it. And then, be able to take down the actual physical property and use that as right of way.
Right.
The big question is always going to be whether or not the property owner and TxDOT agree on that independent assessor's assessment of the property's value. And I was aware of at least a handful of property owners who were on a lawsuit against TxDOT or involving TxDOT because of cost assessments and what they were offering the property. For people who have a business or have a home, this is still where they are located and rooted and want to be able to continue operating. And so if you've driven along I-35 in the last 6+ months, you have already seen people are closing up shops and having to relocate and figure out that next business plan. And that could mean either trying to find a comparable property in the area or nearby, or some people are just like,
that's it. TxDOT is, I'm putting this in heavy quotations, doing a favor, like in good faith, trying to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, there is no choice. And so it's like they can negotiate and hopefully people got good deals.
Yeah. It's the power of eminent domain. Once you declare that, especially as, a government entity like TxDOT, you have a lot more protections in place to be able to pursue that sort of purchasing process and land acquisition. Some of the equity concerns that we have heard with this project is like knowing the demographics of the corridor and knowing the socioeconomic statuses of a lot of the businesses or residents along that corridor. It's like you have the state agency coming in saying, I want your property. There's only a finite number of things you can do before it's like, this is not in my hands anymore.
Exactly.
I need to leave. And I think that is something that has been really telling throughout this process as kind of continuation of what we were talking about earlier with just the amount of community engagement and feedback and concern with the history of 35 and the continuation of this project, kind of in a similar vein of, these practices of essentially kicking these people out of where they live, where they work. I think this has been a really interesting chapter in Austin's transportation history to see that interaction between existing communities and transportation projects and where that tension builds.
Right. I'm definitely seeing, businesses, specifically on just like that east side of 35 in between Dean Keaton and like 38th Street. It's like a ghost town over there right now. So, shout out to all those businesses. We're going to miss you. Hopefully you'll find another place to be. It's craziness.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's your favorite way to get around Austin?
Ooh, I live right off of the 803 bus line. And so I love using Metro Rapid to go into downtown. I hate driving into downtown, especially on the weekends. So that's kind of my go-to right now. I am trying to get more into Metro Bike System, especially as they're expanding that out, because I admittedly have not ridden a bike in an embarrassing amount of time. And I'm like, this is just like, I'm too old for this. Like, I need to get over that fear of riding a bike in a big city.
I am the same way. I used to love riding bicycles.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I grew up in a real rural part of New York State. And so there was no concern about riding your bike in the middle of the road or on the side of the road. Versus here, I feel like while the city is building out that, protected bike lane infrastructure, it's still, there's gaps in that system for sure, depending on where you are in town. So it's it's definitely a concern of mine, but I am trying to utilize that more because I do miss the feeling of just riding a bike around town and just, going to my neighborhood park and just bringing a book and something. It's so therapeutic to me.
I used to ride bikes all the time, specifically when there was less car traffic on the east side. Like when I was a kid, we rode up, like to your point, we rode our bikes in the middle of the street.
Yep.
Like maybe not MLK, but for sure Chacon, we just were all in the middle of the street on our bikes. Yeah. And now I'm scared to drive my car down Chacon most days. Yeah. I would love to start back riding bikes, but it's scary. I've always wanted to either be, to your point, a person that rides a bike more or really just a person that uses the bus more, and I just don't do it. Do you have any advice for the rest of us?
I heard this piece of advice from Lonnie Stern, who's the executive director of Movability, and he said, don't strive for perfect, just strive for something. Small changes can make a big impact in our mobility habits. And so for me, my thing was taking the 803 into town was like, I'll do this for ACL. I don't want to deal with Uber or trying to drive and park near ACL. Let me do that. I did that 3 years ago. Absolutely loved it. And now that is my way of, if I'm going into downtown on a weekend night, or I want to go to Zilker Park, or I just want to not drive my car because sometimes either I don't want to refill my gas, or it's just like, why not? Why not just take this bus? I think it's starting small and feeling like you don't need to completely upend your mobility habits. You don't need to give up your car, but if there are small ways or events that you can start going to with mass transit, acclimate yourself to the system, get to know your routes, get to know, the frequency of those routes, if there's any delays that you might need to be mindful of, because that also informs people's ridership habits. And then I also think even if you don't take necessarily, the bus or rail system, if you have that last mile connection to make of like, oh, I need to get to the other side of downtown, I'm going to take a Lime scooter, or I'm going to take one of the Metro bikes. That's also a way to familiarize yourself with the system, familiarize yourself with traveling in the city core or in different parts of the Austin area. I think starting small is a really great way to dip your toe in the water of mass transit and see what you like. And you might be like, oh, that route was terrible, I'm never doing that again. Or, oh my gosh, I'm so afraid on this scooter, I don't want to do it. And that's fine. But I think that it's familiarizing yourself with it will help you learn your preferences and then feel more comfortable returning to those.
I think I'm going to take your advice. I'm definitely going to stay away from Lime scooters because I think they're death traps. But maybe I'll ride a bike or ride the bus. That's going to be my personal goal.
Yeah.
I'm going to be realistic and say within the next 3 months, I'm going to either ride a Metro bike or ride the bus. Kelsey, thank you so much for being here. This has been great. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, you made transportation interesting, and that is no small feat.
We live in a bigger system that impacts a lot of people, and transportation isn't just about our commutes to and from a place. It impacts so many aspects of our life. So if we can really find ways to find enjoyment in it or find solutions to it that work for our lives, I feel like that's just better in the long term for everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Mic drop. That's it. Kelsey, thank you for being here. This is great.
Thank you, Nikki.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Kelsey's social media in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.